Hello, I'm Lukas. I'm a designer based in Berlin. That's also where I studied at the University of the Arts and graduated in process and product design there. And that was in 2015. And ever since, I'm having a small studio in Berlin. And one project that keeps us busy from the very beginning on is one that we call now THREE+ONE, but that name came much later. It started all with an idea of creating a connector that allows for collective building. So the idea was that it is open, so that it doesn't define too much and allows others to work with it, and also allows that a different range of material can be plugged to this connector. And we were always interested in those different materials also to allow that reused materials and low and high-tech materials can come together. In the beginning, we were mostly experimenting with found materials such as wooden bars and street signs, and these experimentations from one connector more and more developed into a system, and that system again in a lot of different applications. And with those applications also the topics that we were working on on this system changed a lot. So the core of all that is just this lasered small connector that in its simplest form consists of 4 times the same piece that's stuck together and allows that from many sides bars connect to it. Well, then maybe I'll show just a bunch of things that we were building with it, so that it gets a bit more clear what it's used for. So here we see a structure that was one of the first a bit larger ones, a bleacher. And here we can see that this is already purely in steel. So when we had the idea that all those materials can come together, we were quickly confronted with structural engineers and regulations. So everything was pretty much transformed into a very heavy duty and so a thing that you can calculate better. And that was never really the plan, but from this one application then others came that also were very much steel-based. But when we go back, so most elements that we see here are again the same elements that were used in this bookshop. So we always try to also work with institutions in a way that the material could travel from one application to the other, which is not always so simple, because sometimes material is just stuck in an institution once it's in there. But sometimes it's possible, and like this, it was also often a nice link between different projects and institutions, and a lot of learning for us and challenging also for the others, for the institutions, but also I think nice learning for both sides. This is still the largest thing that we've built. It's in the making here, so that's a space at the Luma Foundation, a foundation that we worked with a lot and still work with them. And that is for their Atelier Luma design research lab, and again a lot of steel. Then later we scaled everything a bit smaller to also make more furniture. In this case it's different materiality, that's stainless steel, so that's in a way the purest version, that's just the material. And then also very small furniture. Those last examples are really designed, I would say, so there is not much different possible that you could do with the same elements. Some of the applications before consist of very simple pieces that allow much easier reuse. And besides working with institutions, we also work more and more with private clients. In this case, it's a kitchen in our studio, where it's still the structure, but a lot of woodwork came in. And I always liked a lot that it's possible to have very different modes of working with it, so that it could either be a service that we provide, for example, for the design biennial in Istanbul, we designed a kit of furniture and everything was produced by people in Istanbul. And is also everything was reused in a museum in Belgium, Z33. So we just made plans with other institutions that don't want to spend so much time. It's also possible to do the full service planning and building, and for private clients it's very close to normal carpentry, so it's just making furniture for someone. And then there are also other projects where private clients just ask us for some connectors and then they build their own furniture from it. This is quite different project that was, actually it's older than all the other examples. I've picked it because I think it's a bit related to what we do now. It's a bar for a design fair in Belgium, and I felt really bad that for 10 days or even less we should build so much, so I tried to not use any new material, but I was also not so fascinating by showing all the recycling back then. So we made those stools that are in the inside made from a lot of scrap that we processed into 4x4s and then just wallpapered everything. And the connectors in this case were also self-made with a circular saw from leftover PET material. Yeah. So that's before all that started. This is like one of the first examples, which is basically was the structure that in the stool is then hidden. That's in our studio, I think, almost 10 years ago. And this, for example, is the very beginning of the Atelier Luma. Also, when this project started, we had no idea that this would become something so large and so official in the end. So it also started within this little shed, again with the same tables that were before that, the book fair and the bleacher. And over the time it developed into this larger space and everything became more and more formal, and a lot of people work for that institution now. And we became kind of a supplier for them and always worked with them on different projects, and in a way the system was a good choice, I think, for that, because it for this uncertainty of what this institution will be like in the future, it was also easy to grow and shrink and rethink certain parts of it. But then with those projects, I also realized more and more that we also started to consume a lot of material, which was in a way not the starting point. And that brought us actually to much more focusing on the material that's used for the system, and in a way back to the beginning when it was still made from wood. But wood, again, is a long story to really understand where that comes from, and if it's sourced in an okay way and responsibly traded, and all those questions that come with most materials. But with wood, it was for me quite interesting that the region that I come from, so this is a photo from the farm of a friend of mine, and in the last years we set up there together a little sawmill, which is this house here. That it's possible to really follow the material to its origin, and to qualify if that, if it's okay to work with it. And for me, that's at the moment the most interesting part about thinking about the system, to transform it into a project where we have this sourcing completely under control. Completely is at the moment not true, because we still use steel connectors. So far that has also a reason, because steel allows a lot of reuse cycles. So I'm super open for other materials, but I would really like to work with a material for the junction which uses the smallest amount of material, but is crucial for the function of several cycles of reuse, something really durable. And then we realized that normal wood processing in our region is super centralized. So there is one sawmill that has the capacity to cut the forest of, that's not a precise number, but 1/10 of the German forest. And this again means that most of wood that comes from private gardens or hedges or fell in a storm will never find a way there, because it makes totally no sense with this big machinery to think about those small amounts. At the same time, small amounts is already really a lot. And also it's quite interesting because we mostly focus on few species that are totally overused, and forget about many other trees that are just not so famous. So in furniture we always think about oak, and for building it's always spruce. And we are running out of those, and we are burning a lot of other trees just because there is no real market for it. But they bring a lot of good qualities, and it's just also extremely beautiful when we cut the wood. It's always like a big surprise when you open the stack and beautiful textures come out. But sourcing, and so this very first step of sourcing is just is one of many. problems. For this, you need a lot of machinery already, which was really nice because it's a lot of stuff that is used in farms, and this friend has a farm, so we can handle those bigger trees. This, for example, is, so in the background, the smaller house is that farm, and we had an ice storm in January, and then many trees collapsed. Here we see a cherry tree that fell in that storm, and well, we will come back to that cherry tree. And that is around at the same time we were also cutting some trees, which is, I think, also relevant. So, I mean, having only wood that comes from hedges and so on is super nice, but also there is also a moment too in forestry that trees are just in the age to be cut. But normally there is a good time to do that, and that is winter, because when we cut those and pull them out, you actually don't destroy the forest ground. So everything happens on frozen ground and is protected by the ice and snow. So if you cut single trees out, you don't do any harm to the forest, or almost no harm. That is just a photo I got from my team yesterday, so the cherries are cut now. And so that's probably material for future systems, but it still needs to dry, and that brought us to another step of that project. Well, short interruption, so that is this sawmill next to us that does just spruce and spruce, and which is cool that this is somewhere around, because also some other people work like external transport companies for them, and sometimes they can also in the evening just do an extra hour and use their machines to bring material to us. So in a way we are also benefiting from that bigger company. And so in the end we realized we have to dry a lot of wood, and that will take a lot of time and space, or energy. So that's the two options. So mostly it's just put into a drying chamber, and then you can do that within a week time from cutting to using. But that was not an option for us, because if you just wait, the same thing happens. So we bought a barn, and so the project always extended in that way. It was not expensive, but so this is actually at the moment, or starts to be, our wood storage. It has quite good climate conditions. It's relatively open, and it's also a really nice construction, I think. It's also something that I learned of a lot. It's just oak and clay, and totally modular. So in a way it's really similar to what we do in there. So that I just put in, that's a similar house disassembled. So that's just waiting for reassembly. That's in our barn. We had to repair a bit the roof, but that's all done now. And yeah, so it will take at least 2 years from now that the first wood that we are cutting now can be used in structures. So to work with wood in the way that normal cabinet making would do it, it needs to be super dry, and that is due to heatings and air conditions, and also the fact that it will be glued, and we don't do any gluing, so we don't need it in this super dry condition. So I think it also, the system is still really relevant in that sense, because so we could also just build wood furniture now, and but the system allows that we work with quite thin sections, and saving material is, I think, still super relevant also when it's sourced well. And because the junction, this connector, is super strong, we can also save wood. And if a bar itself shrinks 1/10 of a millimeter, also doesn't matter. That would just become a problem once it's glued. And so I'm now also really interested in finding ways to do surfaces that allow to move a bit more, because surfaces are still always a problem, because they usually are based on glue, and glue we don't want to use. The outside of this barn has these typical wood shingles that are always on the side of the house that's mostly attacked by the weather. And it's, I think, a really beautiful material, very, was used in all farmhouses in that region, and it doesn't need any products on the wood, and the wood is super thin, and I find it also a really interesting proof for the fact that we use too little species, because they used different wood types for it, often beech, which is also one of the famous ones, but is normally that's known to rot extremely quickly. But in this shape it doesn't. So it shape and so the right use and a very careful use. So especially the thinner you build, the longer it lasts. So that I found really interesting about it. And then it's also a material that always comes in different qualities, and we realized that we will either have a lot of material that we cannot use for the system, or we need also to work with smaller bits of wood. So that's why we bought this machine that produces shingles. That we have also a plan for types of wood or pieces of wood that would not normally find a way into our system, but that is kind of a side project to avoid that we produce waste. Yeah, and the wooden versions are more like this. And that's probably also slightly how the structures will look that we build now, I think. Yeah, and that's like one example of a table that we've made in a way like this. Yeah, that's actually where we are at the moment. This whole branch of the project is still very much at the beginning. But that's, I think, where our focus is going to.